Hello and welcome to the Let That Shift Go podcast. I'm Noel.
And I'm Lena.
And this is where we talk about the good, the bad, and all the shift in between.
We'll just talk mad shift.
Let's get into it.
And on today's episode, we have a very special guest with us today, Esme Saleh. She is my sister-in-law, and she reached out to me recently and just had something so profound on her heart that we decided to get together and record about it. And, I'm not even sure what this episode's going to be called, but it is about shifting the idea of loss. And so Esme is a profound journalist. She has interviewed very, exciting, popular people that everyone has heard of in Hollywood. She's worked for some of the big networks. And now she is also an entrepreneur who creates her own works of art with some amazing hand-painted candles that have been featured in some of the most amazing architectural magazines. And so I'm so excited to have her on as a guest. Thank you, Esme, for being here.
And thank you for the invitation always to be here in this space. And just, I know you call me sister-in-law, and I think in a lot of ways we kind of grew up together.
Mm-hmm. We sure
So did. I consider you like my blood sister. I have seen you grow, and I'm sure you've seen a lot of different phases of my growth as well.
Mm-hmm.
And now is just such a good place. We are both in this space where we welcome expansion.
More of ourselves.
Yes.
More of our authentic selves.
Yes.
I've really seen you grow into more of yourself in the past few years, especially.
And I have benefited, experienced so many wonderful things here at Serenity Cove that have just illuminated the work that I do in my professional life and also in my just spiritual life. And it's sort of full circle to be able to share. I know when you first started the podcast, you had loosely given the invitation.
Mm-hmm.
And in my mind, I'm like, what do I have to say? What do I have to share? I don't know what my message is or my story is. And the other day I had that moment of like being proud, I guess, of the journey of how I got here, because I remember when Linus, now my 8-year-old son, was first born, and we would go on these little outings to just kind of like get out of the house. And I was in one of those like nursing rooms at a department store, and a woman asked if he was my only son. And I said, no, he's not. And I told her the story of loss, right? And she said to me, jaw down to the floor, I don't think I could ever survive after going through something like that. You'd have to put me in a rubber room.
Yeah.
And I felt a little bit ashamed in that moment because I thought, am I not broken enough? Like, I feel broken.
Mm-hmm.
Do I not show that enough? And in that moment, I thought, like, did my loss teach me anything? And is this woman trying to like put me in a space where I feel like I didn't do enough grieving?
Oh, yeah. Well, tell us a little bit about your loss, just to fill us in on those who don't know.
Yes. So, I feel like in a lot of ways it was our loss, as a family.
Yeah.
We were on the path of becoming parents in, 2014. And we had a very traumatic birth experience. And like to put it mildly, and I think it illuminated so much of my perfectionism because I was like wanting to be the perfect pregnant mama. I wanted to do everything by the book. I read all the books, all the things that I was supposed to do.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, all the things. And I was working as a very successful producer. I wanted to continue working all the way up until the end of my pregnancy, which I did. And we went to the hospital that morning that I was in labor, and things didn't go as planned.
Yeah. Yeah.
Deep breaths.
Deep breath. Deep breath.
And in that moment, I said to myself, I don't know whatever force is out there, what the universe wants to tell me, but I'm here for it.
Wow.
I'm here for it. And there are a lot of details that, that I probably won't share today because this is not an episode about that.
Yeah.
It's not. It's not about the nitty-gritty.
Yeah.
And it's about the acceptance that comes with a loss, right? Yeah. And when we went through that, one of the things that the doctor told my husband at the time was, your wife is going to live.
Yeah.
And I took that as a challenge, really, because, I was in that weird space of possibly not making it and coming through, all of those things, like the proverbial near-death experience and all of that stuff. But it was a challenge because, I'm going to live.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm going to figure it out.
I'm going to live on purpose.
On purpose. On purpose. And my sister came to visit me in the hospital a few days after everything evolved. She said to me, because I was just a mess. I was broken, just a mess. And she says, you really have to look after yourself. You can die of a broken heart.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, I can, but I didn't die the first time, or whatever I was up against during that moment. And I said to myself, I don't know how I'm going to live.
Yeah.
I don't know how this is going to look for me. And I was a very anxious kid. I went through so much anxiety as a kid because there was already a lot of loss in our world growing up.
Yeah.
Whether it was poverty or just instability.
Yeah.
Insecurity. So a lot of my adult life was a remedy of what I thought that was.
If I do all the right things, if I do everything I'm supposed to do, if I have the job, if I have the home, if I have then everything will be fine.
Right.
And
you saw a lot of that because you grew up with us, and you are like a witness to what we went through, but you didn't really ever talk about it with us because it just was a circumstance, right?
Yeah.
And so when you go through such a profound loss, you start to examine all of the other things that you've lost.
Yeah. Yeah.
And for me, it was
it's like while you're down here, we might take a look around.
Yeah. And a lot of people call it the dark night of the soul. You call it rock bottom. It really isn't like, the grief journey. It's like
Yeah.
the stages. I didn't experience it that way. I experienced it in so many different ways that made me feel crazy sometimes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And there was one day early on when I was having just a really tough day, and I drove myself to the cemetery.
Ugh.
I drove up the hill to Forest Lawn, and I felt like the purpose. I was searching for a purpose. I didn't know why this happened.
Yeah. The why.
A lot of people talk about, sometimes it was God's plan or the things that they want to say to make you feel better.
Yeah. They don't know what to say.
They don't know what to say. And I get it now.
Yeah.
I get it. Because people mean well. They don't want you to hurt. They don't want you to experience that pain on such a deep level. So they try to say the things to erase it.
Yeah.
And what I've learned is that the silence is where the healing comes.
Yeah.
Right?
Presence.
The presence. And just the allowance, like having someone there to give you the space to just say, this really sucks.
Yeah. Yep.
This shouldn't have happened. And that day that I drove to Forest Lawn, and Dad, God bless his soul, he picked up the phone. I called him because I wasn't sure I wanted to even be there anymore.
Yeah.
Whew.
Yeah. It's the U-turn.
And I don't think I get so emotional because I don't think anyone in our family knows this particular story besides Dad and, of course, my husband. But he basically talked me off the ledge.
Yeah.
Whew. And on that drive home, I had some pretty dark thoughts. And I decided if my life's going to continue, I need to find a way to walk this earth with my son in a different way. And along the way, there were so many books, so many things.
Yeah.
That people shared. And gosh, like a lot of them are really, really dark and sad. Like the titles in and of themselves are like, when you lose a child, when, like the hand that rocks, like all these things. Yeah. And you're just like, wow. And I couldn't get past the first chapters of any of those books.
Yeah.
And there's a reason. And I know that reason now, and a friend suggested, why don't you try going to a support group, and that might not be such a bad idea because you get there and you're like, maybe being around other people who've experienced such profound losses in their life. And I got to the first one and oof, as an empath.
Oh, yeah. You're like, now I not only have my stuff, I have yours too.
And then it becomes a like, gosh, you got it way worse than I did, and it's like, I need to be there for you. And I need to be there like to comfort you. And I found myself like holding hands with strangers. And then I'm like, wait, I'm not getting what I need.
Yeah.
But then it just sort of reminds you of like your life,
Mm-hmm.
because that's what it is, really. I'm the youngest of 6, and you saw that dynamic firsthand, right? I was always kind of brushed to the side, and it brings back those feelings of like, I need help too.
Yeah. Like there's no room for you for what you need.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And that that for me was just not the right fit, and I can recognize it now. And I think if I were to go back into that space, I could be more present for the people that need it in a different capacity.
Yeah.
And more of a healing capacity, right? And so it was almost like opening up like those little like Russian eggs.
The Russian dolls.
Yeah.
Peeling back the layers of the onion.
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
And like the first one, okay, well, that's not working.
Mm-hmm.
And like, I think my motivation was like, I got to get up out of bed.
Yeah. First things first.
I got to get my life going again. And at the time we had our dog Lucy, who, needed to go out for the bathroom breaks and needed to do all the things that dogs do. And she forced me to get out of that routine. And I eventually went back to work, and you talk about like, to hearing you describe like what I used to do in the past, kind of like you get that, like, was that really me?
Like it's somebody else's life.
Yeah.
It's a whole nother timeline.
Yeah.
That doesn't belong to you anymore.
Yeah. I sort of just kind of not disassociated, but like I don't put so much importance on what I used to do in the same way that I used to do it, And my first realization of that was when I went back to work, and my first like big event was the Golden Globes, and I put on a fancy dress, and luckily it was, an outdoor event, and I was able to wear dark sunglasses because I felt so out of place. I felt like I was like an alien walking this red carpet, and there's like these celebrities everywhere, and everyone's asking them what they're wearing. And I'm just like, I'm just trying to get out of bed. I'm just trying to like survive this like darkness that I'm feeling.
Yeah.
And just like get through my day and feel like I have a purpose. And I thought maybe my work was that.
But the perspective shifted big time.
Yeah. The perspective shifted like so much so that it started to affect really how I did my work.
Yeah.
And at the time, I was working with one of our fashion correspondents who was there to sort of do the fashion critique. And we were walking down because he asked me to walk into the Step and Repeat, which is a place where the photographers go to have their photos, or the people go to have their photos taken by the photographers. And I'm like, yeah, sure, I'll walk you down there. And he's standing there and like he's posing, and like in my head, I just kept thinking, this is just so silly.
This is not real.
This is not real life.
No.
And on the walk back to our spot, he says to me, "Are you okay?" And I'm sure you can relate to this when someone says, "Are you okay?" It's that invitation to like let the floodgates open.
No, I'm not.
And I think that's kind of what my response was. Like, it was, no, I'm not okay.
Yeah.
This is all so fucked up.
This isn't even real.
And I told him, and he grabbed my hand. He's like, "Honey, what are you doing here?" And I was just like, you're kind of right.
What am I doing
What
here?
am I doing here playing? Like, I think I was still wearing Spanx underneath my dress because I still had like the baby weight and my, my boobs are still engorged, like I was still trying to mask the idea that like I still went through childbirth. I still went through all of this. And most people who go through that and take care of a child are very, very tired and very like just worn out, let alone going through that process and then not having a baby to hold.
Yeah. Yeah. Having grief, deep grief.
So that was my first clue.
Like a wake up. It's almost like in the middle of the story, the play, you know, it was like, hey, what are you doing here still on the set? You know, this isn't really what you're here to do. Yeah.
And what you're saying is the voice in the back of my head. And it was so early and so fresh that I didn't really quite know what my life was supposed to look like, what it should look like. And it was sort of a series of things that would happen that were just kind of really crappy. And now that I see them, they weren't crappy things. They were doors that were opening.
Yes. They were the signposts.
Yeah.
Yes.
And one of the signposts was I was sent to cover a funeral. And it was a celebrity funeral, and there's like a media barricade, and everyone was there, every network. And I didn't have boundaries. You know, I didn't have like the wherewithal to say to my bureau chief, like, I don't know if I can do this, you know? So I went anyway. And my sound guy, you know, he says to me, you don't have to be here. Go to your car. Sit in your car. I'll call you if something happens. And at the time, like, I would never do that. Like, I needed to be present. I was a good producer, and I needed to like be on the ball. Like, I wasn't going to like neglect my job.
Yeah.
And he shooed me away. He says, go. And thank you, Doug, if you're listening. That meant the world to me.
Yeah.
Oh gosh. And then here comes the tears again, because I remember that he had lost his sister.
So he knew what that part felt like. Yeah.
He told me that story like years prior, and I knew his story. But I realized that not everyone's going to understand.
Yeah.
And the people that do are the ones that have gone through, that have experienced it, and that know. And that's the definition of empathy.
Yeah.
And compassion. And so in that moment, I did go back to my car. And I felt terrible. I think I felt more guilt about not being there than I felt sadness about covering a funeral. And, you know, and how that evolved was I got back to the office, and I got a phone call from Human Resources. I got a call from your boss, and, you know, you're not doing your job.
Yeah.
And I felt so slighted. And I felt so like, I felt like, oh my gosh, like, don't they understand? And then I realized something in that moment, that I was a fish out of water now. Like, my boss used to sign me to like the sad stories, and he would always like know that whenever I'd interview someone, if they wanted tears, I had the ability to connect, and he would call me his Oprah. And I always thought that was like a badge of honor. And in hindsight, I thought, gosh, that's kind of an a-hole thing to do, because I don't want to do that anymore. Like, I want to connect to people, but I don't want to leave them with that feeling that we're sharing something so personal, and then I'm just going to walk out of your life, but I've got that moment on camera.
Yeah. It's just for the sensationalism of it, not for the depth of the human experience or connection.
Right.
Yeah.
And so those moments continue to happen, and I felt like I needed to find a different way. And I had worked so long in the industry that I didn't want to walk away from it entirely, because I felt like I had worked so hard. I'm first generation, like college graduate, all the things. And I wanted my family to be proud of me. I wanted them to
The ego is still present.
oh, ever so present. And I didn't know what it was that I would even do beyond that. Like my entire identity was wrapped into my work.
Yeah. You spent a lifetime building that.
I spent a lifetime building it. I met my husband doing it. I grew up in that world. Like, for better or for worse, the people that I worked with were like my family because I spent so many hours doing it, and I missed so many things that I wanted to do doing it. So I felt like I've sacrificed so much. Why walk away now?
Yeah, that's many of us. Yeah. So what happened?
Ooh, so then I became pregnant again. Oh, and that was the most fine dance of joy and fear.
Oh, yeah.
Let's not do that again, And fortunately, I had a wonderful team of doctors who held my hand through the whole thing. And one of the things that was very crucial in the process was creating those boundaries that I never had. So in that world, when you create boundaries that you never had before, the people that are around you start to feel like you're pushing back.
So like when you say, no, I
Right.
cannot do this. No.
Right. But it was different this time because my incentive was my child.
Yeah.
And you're a mama.
You
Like,
had something to fight for.
right?
that-
There's
yeah.
nothing you wouldn't do for your kid, even if you haven't met them yet.
Yeah.
And I think for me, that was the most important thing in the moment is a safe and successful pregnancy. So fast forward 9 months later, Linus arrived safely. Everything kind of came full circle,
Yeah.
I just lavished in like being a mom, and I was worried about like postpartum and all of those things. And I experienced such a beautiful journey with him that it made me realize I don't have to be the same person that I was before. And I don't have to look back in regret, but just use it as a stepping stone to figuring out what it is that I really want to do with my life and what I want my child, what I want Linus to see me do with my life and how I experience joy. And in a lot of ways, he has seen the evolution of that in those beginning stages. And he is a very creative kid, and he's a creative kid on his own. But I often wonder, like, does he see that as an invitation, like his mother doing the things that she loves as an invitation to just embrace what he loves too? And maybe not.
Yeah.
But, so when he was born and I would go and do talk therapy. And I remember the therapist asking what my goal was for therapy. And I said, I just want to be able to talk about my first son without breaking down. And she just kind of nodded and smiled. It's like, And I think that was her way of saying, well, good luck, And I knew then that was not going to be a possibility. I mean, it's hard to even do it here today.
Yeah.
And I think that's what my strength became.
Because it's like saying, I'm hoping to not feel. And it's like, no, you didn't come here for that.
You didn't come here for that. But also part of learning and part of healing means that you have to face the loss. You have to face the things that you were sweeping on the rug under all those years. And the biggest one for me was the feeling of the other shoe always dropping, because it always did. And, why bother? Like, something bad's going to happen.
Yeah.
We were kids, you're going to lose the house. You're going to.
If things are good, that means something bad's coming right around the corner. So don't get too comfortable.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's a story many of us have. Mm-hmm.
Yes. And, and confronting that was not something that's easy to do or fun to do. You don't want to do it because it means you're doing the work.
Yeah.
And when you're doing the work and you're a mother at the same time, like, that's really tough, because you don't want to have your child see how difficult it is to find the new you. And I felt a lot of guilt, because here I was leaving behind a career that at the time I loved doing. And what was I going to do now? Like, how are we going to make this work? And I just found a way to embrace it. And I think one of the books that I read along the way was No Death, No Fear by Thich Nhat Hanh. And that really opened my eyes to so much.
Yeah. How so?
Oh, well, if you know a lot of his work, he's a Buddhist monk. And I was raised Catholic. I don't know anything about Buddhism. I don't know anything. But I explored, in my 20s and college, and meditation, mindfulness, and couldn't afford to buy the book from Barnes & Noble. So I'd go in and I'd sit in the corner, and I would write down the page that I left off on so that I'd remember to go back again to read. And mindfulness was always something that was available to me, but I didn't know quite how to incorporate it, right? And then this book, I don't know how it came into my world, but it did, and I'm so grateful. And there was a passage right in the beginning that just shifted the perspective of how I walked this earth with my son, with my first son. And it was just such a beautiful passage that I have it bookmarked here,
please,
I want to share.
Please read it.
And he talks about losing his mother and how he was going to be able to relate to the world around him, after her loss, and how difficult that was. And he says, I opened the door and went outside. The entire hillside was bathed in moonlight. It was a hill covered with tea plants, and my hut was set behind the temple halfway up. Walking slowly in the moonlight through the rows of tea plants, I noticed my mother was still with me. She was the moonlight caressing me as she had done so often, very tender, very sweet. Wonderful. Each time my feet touched the earth, I knew my mother was there with me. I knew this body was not mine, but a living continuation of my mother and my father and my grandparents and great-grandparents, all of my ancestors. Ooh, I can't read that without getting teary-eyed, because, he says, those feet that I saw as my feet were actually our feet. Together, my mother and I were leaving footprints in the damp soil. Ooh. And after reading that, I realized that I already had the relationship with my son. It was there all along. I just never had the courage to access it from a spiritual place.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because in order to do that, you have to let go of all the things that you grew up believing.
Yeah. How did it shift the way you saw spirituality?
It changed everything.
Mm.
You go through the process. I mean, even on the day of his funeral, I remember my father doing the eulogy alongside an imam. And I didn't feel a connection to any of it. And I know it sounds weird, but it's not that I didn't feel a connection to the words. It was that the religion, the aspect of religion was, I couldn't make sense of the loss through those eyes.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't until Jake, your son, my nephew, his little guitar.
Yeah.
He stood there on that day and somehow found the courage to play Here Comes the Sun. And that was God for me.
Yeah.
That moment was God for me. That gesture. And I realized that I was looking for God in not the wrong places, but in the places that I didn't think he existed.
Yeah.
That was in nature, in my breath.
Yeah. In a song.
In a song. Being outside. Just being, right? And early on, the hummingbirds. I know a lot of people who have suffered loss have this profound connection to hummingbirds, and I get it now.
Yeah.
They would come early on and like practically knock their little beak against the window, asking me to look. And now they come and I invite them, and we have a very deep connection. And those moments in the past would make me feel like I was a little crazy. And I'm sure you can relate to that aspect of like being on a spiritual journey and wondering if anyone would get you or understand you.
Yeah. Yeah. There's so many suffering in silence with that same question and just not letting each other know.
Right.
You know?
Right. And I think that's why
It doesn't fit into the box.
it doesn't fit into the box. And I think maybe that's why I felt that call and that pull to record this with you today. And here, you'd asked me, like, do you want to do it on Zoom or do you want to come in person? But I think this place, like, has become the invitation to welcome those experiences.
Yeah.
And
come home to yourself.
To come home to yourself.
Yeah.
And to really just be open to the idea that sometimes the things that you can't explain are not supposed to be.
Yeah.
You're supposed to just experience them without trying to prove that they exist.
Yeah.
And I sat outside the other day and I saw the shadow of a bird. And my instinct was to look for the bird.
Oh.
And by the time I looked around to find the bird, it was gone. And that sat with me because, like, if I had just enjoyed the moment and just seen the shadow of the wings flapping and experiencing that moment, I wouldn't have lost it, and so I think that's kind of how I explain my relationship with Laith and his name means lion in Arabic. And I think that, like that kind of like segued into what it is that I'm doing now.
Mm-hmm.
Because after he died, one of my dear friends, Chaz, who lives in Portland, she asked me to paint a lion.
Mm.
And I think we have one here too.
Yep.
And she asked me to paint a lion, and I'm like, how would she even know? How would she know? Oh my goodness.
I have it here.
And it's signed on the bottom corner, ES 2014. And it's kind of funny, but like my mom had this portrait of Jesus on her wall, or she still does. And it's the kind of portrait where the eyes sort of follow you wherever you walk. And that's kind of how I feel about this one, but like not in a weird way that I used to feel about the Jesus. But anyway, when Chaz asked me to do this, she was my invitation
To create.
And it was something that I'd always done whenever I would be stressed. If I would come home from like a really tough story, I'd open up my watercolor palette and I'd just like let it flow. And it was like my escape. And I realize now that sometimes what it is that you are drawn to during the times that you feel most disconnected to yourself is your passion.
Yeah. It's when you can hear it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And she asked me to make this for her, and I didn't know what I was doing. I just knew that it needed to come out. It needed to like exist in a different way. And that opened the door to other forms of art. I created a logo for a friend's business and, a baby shower invite and just little things that I would weave into like, my day to day while I was doing my quote unquote real job.
Mm-hmm.
And fast forward after Linus was born, I just started exploring it a little bit more and feeling like this is what makes me happy. And it might not be any good, but at least that's the story that I was telling myself. It might not be any good, but it makes me feel alive.
Yeah.
And
that's the currency.
That was the currency. And it was always like this voice in the back of my head that said the process is the purpose. Like the process of doing this is the purpose. It's not the outcome. It's being in that state of like bliss and joy, because you're just doing it for the sake of being and loving what you're doing.
That's everything.
And that's all there is. And, boy, like you get caught up with like motherhood and all the things, and the paintbrushes were put away and all the things that, the reminders weren't there as frequently. But this photo was still hanging on our wall. And in, 2020, when the world just shut down completely, Linus and I were driving through our little town, and I saw a little girl trying to hang a tree swing, or like a makeshift tree swing, over a tree. And this was in a parking lot of like, the middle of like nowhere. And she, I thought she was alone. And I said to Linus, something's not quite right. Let's turn around and see like what this is all about. And I rolled down the window and I asked her if she was okay. And then I see her dad coming out of a car. And I realized I saw the suitcases and the things packed in, and I put two and two together, and I knew what their situation was. So I said to Linus, like, let's go home and put together like some things for them to eat. And it was around like Halloween, and we had some leftover candy, and like, so he was so excited because he felt that kind of like, let's do something nice for these folks, and like, let's, cheer them up. And we go back, and this time she wasn't there, and saw the father, and he's just like, oh, we're okay. We're just a little down on our luck. And I was just so angry, like this kind of like anger and anxiety at the same time, because I'm like, I want to do something for her, and I didn't know how. And like, this bag of candy isn't going to solve anything, but I thought maybe it'll bring her a little joy, but she wasn't there. And next thing you know, I see her little head peeking out of the car, and I was like, this is not okay. And I went home, and I think I called my sister and her husband's police officer. I'm like, what is it that I can, what can I do? Like, I felt like this sense of desperation. And that night when I went to bed, I had a very vivid dream about a flower. And the next day I painted that flower on a candle, because like, that's all that was in front of me. It was like a blank candle, and I had my paints, and I painted this flower, and I was like, all right, well, there's nothing that I can do for this little girl. She was gone. We went back again. The car was missing. But in a way, I think I was trying to heal like my own inner child.
Yeah.
It brought back the memory of, at one point in our lives, being homeless and, spending some time in a car. And although my parents were in that similar circumstance, it made me feel like I was powerless again.
Mm-hmm.
And when I painted, I was trying to overcome that wound.
Yeah.
And I realized that that was going to be my way out of that wounded self, like that feeling of being powerless all of my childhood.
You're going to alchemize it.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to like move it, and I'm going to make it something else.
Yeah.
And then fast forward to November, we still weren't really gathering in big groups. And I had this really love-hate relationship with flowers, because they always reminded me of loss and death.
Mm-hmm.
And so I said, I'm going to paint them on candles, and I'm going to celebrate that way. I'm going to make peace with them in that way. And I did. And I felt bold enough to say, maybe this is something other people will relate to. The idea of impermanence, that nothing lasts forever. The beauty is there to enjoy it in the moment, and it's going to be gone. So you're going to light the candle, you're going to burn it, and it's going to be gone. And that's okay.
Yeah.
And it's okay to do. And in that moment, I felt like I'd always defined success as like an accomplishment, as something that I did
Externally.
Mm-hmm. And when I would paint, I felt sort of like a fraud in a way, because I felt like I'm doing this and I'm enjoying it. It's my meditation. Like, how dare I try to monetize this in any way? And I didn't like the idea of something being so transactional that's meant so much to me. So I struggled with that for a while, and I sat on it for a while. And, my friends would say, like, you need to share these. But I didn't want to go into that space, because I didn't want to lose the feeling of what it was that I was channeling when I was doing this. but again, the whispers, and then again, the dreams. A lot of things for me, like, will come in a dream, and I didn't trust that for a very long time.
Yeah.
I doubted it. And again, the word crazy always comes up because you feel like your intuition is not.
Couldn't possibly be as spot on.
No. And I think the thing that kind of like shifted that for me was when I had a dream that my husband had something in his throat. I woke up that morning and I felt a lump, and it sent him to the doctor because I'm like, you need to get this checked out. Lo and behold, he had a tumor in his thyroid, and and they took it out and the whole thing. And he's like, the first thing he said was, "You're weird." And I thought, okay,
You're welcome.
yeah. But I think the weird has become like a good word.
Like, thank you. Yeah.
In our household. And I embrace that word. The word weird for me means that we get to welcome all of those parts in our lives that were suppressed for a very long time.
Same. Yeah.
And now I love the phrase, I heard this the other day. You have to learn to smuggle your weirdness wherever you go. And smuggling is kind of synonymous for like suppressing, but I love that because it is sort of a way to integrate like all of the parts that make you who you are.
Yeah. I think I like, you have to find a way to celebrate your weirdness wherever you go. I mean, now I actually love being celebrated for being a little bit different. And that was something that was not always that way, especially as a woman and, growing up. And now I'm like, yeah, you know what? It's kind of like my superpower in some ways.
It is your superpower, and it's your light.
Yeah.
It's your light. And I see you in the same way that I see like when you get invited to a party, right? And someone hands you the invitation and you're so excited. I see you in that same way. Like you're the invitation to the party that everybody wants to be at, because it's not, you know that when you get there, you're going to have a good time.
Yeah.
Right. But
the road might be bumpy.
It might be bumpy, but like, there's always that like anxiety of like, am I going to be the awkward one there? Am I going to be like the weird one there? And I'm very like, I'm not antisocial, but I'm an introvert. And so when you see the person as the invitation, then it makes you feel more comfortable to walk that path yourself.
Yeah. That's probably one of the most powerful things I'll ever have received as a description.
And it's a very, like for me, that's how I see it. And I think nothing is an accident.
No. It's the same. You're inviting people into the space of themselves with your words, with your work. And that's what we're all doing for each other.
And that's what I hope you can see, you know, and yeah, sure. There's social media, there's like the magazines and all of the things that in an old life you would hang on to because it's the ego, right? And now it's just it's sort of like, nonchalant. And it drives some people crazy because they're like, you should really enjoy like what you're working towards and what this means. And for me, it doesn't feel that way. It doesn't feel like a celebration. It feels like an invitation.
Yeah.
Because it feels like if I can do this, if I can share a piece of my joy and how I got here, then maybe it becomes the invitation by way of so on the nose, a light,
the illumination,
then that is my gift and my purpose.
Yeah.
And I feel that so deeply.
Yeah.
And the reason why I know this to be like my truth is, I've been asked to do workshops, candle painting workshops, and I love the idea of community and gathering, and I accept other invitations for other workshops, but that one is different. And it's not because I don't want to share the ability. It's because when I'm doing it, I'm in this flow state where it doesn't feel like me.
It's a channeling.
Like my hands.
Mm-hmm.
Ooh, and this one hits really deep. On the heels of yesterday, we had the breathwork session. And one of the insights that I took away from that was this feeling of being held by the hand, by my ancestors, by all the people that I have never met or that have loved me throughout my life. And they're holding me by the hand.
Yeah.
And in this process, I feel that so much. And I feel that connection. So, that's not something that you can teach, in a way. But you can show, you can show that is a possibility. And you can do it.
You can emulate it.
You can do it through this medium. So that's the invitation, and it's not a product. And sure, there's a price tag attached to the things that I create and that I make, but it's an invitation to bring something into your home that's going to remind you that
it's all temporary.
It's all temporary.
Enjoy the beauty.
Enjoy it. And light your own way.
Yeah. I love that. Well, thank you so, so much for sharing your story, that the purpose is the process is the purpose, that loss doesn't always equal loss. Actually, in many ways, it leads to the biggest gains, the biggest growth.
Yeah.
When you're able to embrace it and just keep walking forward.
Yeah. Like, I used to think like the idea of expansion was gaining. The idea was this accumulation, but it's not. It's an emptying. It's being open to the idea that when you're expanding everything around you, you have to be open to the mystery of it. You have to know that not everything can be explained, and that you have the ability to create the life that you want based on that mystery. And I'm just so grateful to be able to walk that path and to be reminded. And yeah, it's a beautiful thing.
I'm so glad you've been walking it.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Esme.
Love you.
Love you too.